Hey everyone, thanks for joining. Today I'm speaking again with Lee Jussim. Lee is a professor of psychology at Rutgers, and he's recently working on some stuff on extremism, and they recently put out one report, and I think they're working on more stuff, and this is kind of like a, I don't know, pet interest of mine, so I bugged Lee about this for a bit, so I thought I would get him to come on and talk about what he's been doing. Hey Lee, thanks for coming back on.
Hi, Dave. Thanks for having me.
So I mean, I noticed at the start of this semester you put out something about a course you're teaching on, I think it's extremism or radicalization, and then you started doing this work. You just had the report out, and that's you and I believe 5 other people that are working on this. So if you wanted to talk about that, because like I said, I took a couple of courses on terrorism when I was back in college, and a few things like that, and it just, like I said, a little bit of a pet interest. So go from there.
Yeah, sure. So, I'm almost reluctant to say we. I was involved. I was really happy to be involved, but I was kind of a minor player in this report on, it's not just on the rise of left-wing extremism, it's on how, and when I say left-wing extremism, I guess that's a vague term. That we use the term anarcho-socialists. So these are, they're probably referred to or thought of in the popular press as Antifa, which is not really much of an organization. It's kind of like a label for sort of violent left-wing extremist groups. But these are actual groups. I mean, they're somewhat organized. They have names and they have web pages and they have social networks, which they sort of exploit to both incite outrage against normal, what is at the moment sort of normal, sort of liberal democratic processes. Now, one could have objections to those processes, but they really, these groups are very, very extreme, and they would, as far as I can tell, their goal is to bring down the system. And they are at the core of a lot of the violence that's been occurring in places like Portland and Seattle, as well as other places. I want to be really clear, there have been plenty of peaceful demonstrations, even in Portland. In fact, even in Portland, most of what's going on there are like regular people protesting and objecting. And there have also been police and law enforcement abuses, and going too far, and probably to the point of being criminal. And that some of the left critique of heavy-handed police tactics in dealing with protests is also justified, but that wasn't the point of this report. The point of this report was, it was really one of the first to come out that really doing a deep dive into both the existence of and sort of how these groups use social networks such as, Facebook and Twitter and 4chan and Reddit to both to organize, inspire, essentially, I would describe it as revolution, at least at minimum anarchy, and even to organize tactics for specific, they're not protests. They're not really riots. Riots imply something kind of like random and out of control. These are intentional attacks on symbols of sort of government power and institutions, such as police and municipal government offices. So anyway, that's what this paper was about.
I'm just going to bring this up now because the story just came out. In Minnesota, it was, the group Bugaloo Boys or something like that, or Bugaboo Boys. I don't even know their name.
So I have to interrupt. I was not involved with this, but the same group that produced this expose of sort of anarcho-socialist sort of extremists, prior to my involvement, had a sort of pretty big splash report exposing especially the Boogaloo, but other like really, anti-government sort of revolutionary right-wing extremist groups. So yeah, one of those was the Boogaloo. And the Boogaloo turns out to be very, very tricky because they're kind of cute, right? Like their mark was like dressing in Hawaiian shirts. So what could be threatening about some guy dressed in a Hawaiian shirt? But, these guys, there have actually been a series of arrests over the last, few months of these guys for attacks on police. There's the thing in Minnesota, there's the thing in Michigan, which is related, but quite the same. So these guys are sort of, one of their appeals is that they're actually cute and funny.
Yeah.
And it's about.
Okay, the reason I bring that up is because now this has nothing to do with either Antifa or, Antifa collectively or these guys, but Eamon Bundy. So the rancher out in, I don't know, I can't remember where, like, let's say, Wyoming or something like that, that rancher who fought the law because he wanted to water, he sided with Black Lives Matter because Black Lives Matter is anti-police. Like, there is a lot of similarity between, like, okay, I'm going to give you my tinfoil hat thing of what I'm seeing, and it's, you've got, I think the biggest problem is in education and in something that Free Range Kids is working on, where kids are lacking independence and kids are lacking responsibility and they're not getting the confidence to do things on their own. And then what's going on in the education system, where it's, okay, now it's outright, okay, we're having critical race theory K through 12, but before it was just smaller things where, oh, you have to be careful not to hurt someone. You have to be careful not to harm someone. That idea of repressive tolerance. The more I look into that, the more I see it, like, it started coming into education in the mid 80s. That kind of idea, plus giving kids less responsibility, not even, like, so you're not even giving them putting confidence in them that a 12-year-old can go to the store by themselves and get a quart of milk, right? Like that kind of stuff involved. And then you have these ideas of how, and you see it in the education again, like the West is the worst place in the world. It's done the worst harm. It's done the most. So kids seeing this stuff, and then, you get onto university or whatever, as you're getting older, I'm not saying it's a large population, but you don't need a lot. So then Antifa or the Boogaloo Boys can then go to these people because there's that small percentage who now really feel disenfranchised, feel that, either they're being attacked because they're white and they're the cause of all of this, or they were attacked. And it's creating the fertile ground for these groups to then go, seed their ideas and get extremism. Like, I don't want Antifa and I don't want the Boogaloo Boys. I don't want either of these people. Like, I don't,
well, I completely agree with that. The tone for me personally, both in part because of my work with this group, the NCRI, the Network Contagion Research Institute, which sounds really, antiseptic, but they're like studying all this extremism stuff. It has, I mean, on the one hand, there's a danger in overstating the danger from these extremist groups. Mm-hmm. Right? There's, especially for me now that I'm actually studying these groups, there's a very, there's a long tradition in academic scholarship of people who study something, see it everywhere. Like, and some of it is just genuine. They really kind of maybe discover something, and there's a certain almost evangelical component. They want to tell the world. They really do see it as a bigger problem than other people see it. And that's fine. But there's a risk of it sort of becoming self-promotion. So, the version for me on this work would be saying, oh my God, left-wing extremists are taking over the country and like everybody has to worry about it and all this kind of stuff. And that's too far. That's, they're a threat. I think, there's a bona fide threat. They've been under the radar They've been under the radar in large part because most of the mainstream media leans so far left. They're motivated to deny it. They're not paying attention. You know, they support the sort of the goals of a lot of the social justice protests. So it's sort of hard for them to see it, or even if they see it, I suspect a lot of them feel almost like traitors, you know, to their own political group if they call out someone on their side. But here's the common thing among sort of political groups is this whole sort of black sheep thing. Like you can't criticize your in-group and all this stuff, right? So you have that. And then the same thing in academia. Academia leans so far left that the left-wing extremists are largely below people's radar. And in fact, people, including me, who have called out left-wing extremists have sometimes been the target of sort of cancellation attempts and denunciations and all this sort of stuff. Because like who would call out? Yeah, everyone knows, you know, the social justice movement protests are justified. There's a long history of racism. Finally, people are doing something about it. So how dare you highlight, you know, this tiny fraction of left-wing extremists? It's like, that's sort of the nature of the denunciation. But my point is, I mean, it's not part of my scholarship. So, and I just want to recognize that I, like every other scholar that does work in any area, is at risk of overstating the importance of their own work.
Yeah. Again, I mean, like, okay, I don't, you know, I worry about. Like, I'm not saying every single teacher out there is a social justice warrior. I don't think that. I don't think every administrator is. I think that the people in the, like, my worry is, again, maybe I'm seeing too much of it and I'm just reading too much of it. I don't know, but I see it in like a middle management problem. Like, these are people who like go to meetings. These are people who like to set stuff up. If that process is corrupted and, you know, a teacher gets a curriculum, it looks good. You don't want to, you know, you're teaching kids about racism and how not to be racist. It sounds great. But some of that stuff that's underlying it, like there's one book that's being used in some schools in Pennsylvania right now. And it's from like, it's a little picture book that you would read to toddlers or little kids, like let's say up to about the second grade. I mean, it's, you know, it says whiteness is a contract with racism. I'm like looking at that. I'm like, okay, you don't teach that to little kids. And so if that's making it down to some public schools, there is a problem somewhere in that chain. And again, like it's not to put something like in Texas where they had stuff, and I think it was even up until last year, where they were denying, you know, the Civil War is about slavery and denying, like, you know, minimizing all that. Like, that's just as bad. But again, there's a problem in the middle management somewhere. So, I think we should have to take a look at this. I think, and, you know, again, oh my God, white supremacy is rising. We have to do something about it. And I don't disagree with that. You know, I'm brown. I don't want to see white supremacy rise. But I equate it to Islam. Okay. Oh, we defeated ISIS. No, you didn't. Look what's happening in Africa. A lot of those people are going back to you know, the regions they came from. You beat the organization, but you didn't beat the ideology. You can, the FBI and, you know, Homeland Security can go in and take out all these white supremacist groups today. But if you continuously teach kids that whiteness is a contract with racism, you're gonna get white kids who are pissed off, and you're gonna get, you know, black and brown kids who are pissed off, and you're gonna just grow these groups.
No, that's exactly right. So we have not actually begun working on it, but probably one of the two next papers that are probably going to come out of this Network Contagion Research Institute. And one of the main reasons they brought me in, actually, was not this earlier paper on the sort of left-wing extremists. It was exactly your point that these things are connected. That is, the incendiary anarchic protests in Portland and other places are built on a network of ideas. And those ideas are exactly as you just described. I don't know if they're dominant yet, but they are ascendant throughout educational and intellectual and scientific and media institutions. This whole whiteness. Like that, could you imagine if that was any other group? It's just like so obvious that this would be just beyond offensive. So this might have to do hypothetical. I mean, Amy Wax had a couple of essays on how Black culture contributes to inequality. Now, I could disagree and would disagree with some of her analysis on the merits, but it was essentially a critique of Blackness, and it evoked these hues and cries, and she was eventually removed from teaching first-year students because of it. So it's not like a hypothetical to say, well, imagine this with any other group. So, and so it is really, it's bad. It is very bad. In the 60s, one of the ideas was that, of the new left in the 60s, was that, protest, electoral change, none of that was going to work. The idea that had its roots then was referred to as the long march through the institutions.
Yeah.
And that was the idea that, these sort of radicals and activists would have to do exactly what you just described, become middle managers, become school principals, become chairs of departments and deans, and become the VP of HR in a corporation, and then you start instituting these policies. And you never announce that what you're instituting is you rarely announce that what you're instituting is essentially an evolved form of authoritarian Marxism. You never announce that. What you do is you create a curriculum that focuses on the abuses of capitalism, right? So this is just classic propaganda. And you can do that in a way that is true, because there have been abuses of capitalism. Capitalism has produced some very bad things, right? But if you focus exclusively on those, you're not going to get anything remotely resembling an honest or valid view of the world. But it is very effective at getting people to despise capitalism. And you never have to announce that you're basically instituting Marxist ideology. You never announce it. You never have to announce it. The curriculum is true. The Belgians did horrible things in the Congo, like millions of deaths. That colonial empire. It was horrible. That's just one example. It's one of the worst examples. Obviously, there was the hundreds of years of slavery. We could just, and the whole thing reminds me of. Do you know anything about American baseball? You're reasonably comfortable?
Yeah.
Okay. It would be like focusing on Babe Ruth's strikeouts. And we could do that. Babe Ruth struck out more than anybody else in his era. He struck out early in games. He struck out late in games. He struck out during the regular season. He struck out in the World Series. All of those are true statements. If those are the only statements you are opposed to, you're saying that Babe Ruth is a horrible baseball player.
Okay, but it's the same thing with in that same vein. Like there was it was an ad or something. It was like a public service announcement. Like they used to do those feel good things. It was about Michael Jordan and about all the times he failed. Like the best basketball player in the world, their shooting percentage still sucks. Going back to baseball, a 300 batting average is really good, but that's 30%.
Right.
You fail 70% of the time.
Yeah.
So.
Right. Well, so that goes to your earlier point about sort of you didn't use the term anti-fragile, I don't think, but that was sort of the upshot of it. They're basically making people resilient, and that I completely agree with that. So, as a psychologist, and I can and would relate this to sort of bigger cultural and political trends, but at the individual level, you need to be a functioning human. You need to experience hardship and get through it and realize that you can get through it. And get through it doesn't necessarily mean a happy ending. Like sometimes there's not a happy ending, but you get through that also. And then when that happens to you enough, when you're as a little kid, you're on enough soccer teams that never win a game. you realize, well, am I doing this to win or am I doing this because I enjoy playing? And if I enjoy playing, I don't really care whether I win or lose. I want to win. I care a little bit, but I just want to play soccer. And I can handle losing. And the minute you have that psychology, you are in a much better position to start winning, actually. Because now what you care about is doing the thing, not so much the outcome.
People are like, okay, get woke out of education. Fine, you get woke out of education. But if you don't change that underlying thing where kids can never learn responsibility, like I said, or face hardship, I'm sorry, I don't want kids to feel bad for failing, but if you didn't learn the material, you shouldn't pass that class.
Absolutely.
And I mean, I think it's a detriment to the child if you pass him, like if he didn't manage to meet the requirements of fourth grade English. Every other class you can take fifth grade, but fourth grade English, repeat that, please, or do it over the summer or something. Like,
I don't have any data on this, so I'm really just winging it here. But as far as I can tell, there are a set of things that there's no real obvious, at least I haven't figured out or discovered the logical connection between them. But experientially, I think they are connected. So one is this idea that, like, okay, experiencing bad things is not so terrible. That's like, go out into the world and just, like, make your way through it. That's number one. Number two, sort of an emphasis on fundamental individual rights. This is speech, association, anything like this. That the whole, cancel culture thing. Actually, Greg Lucchino from Fire has a great, it's just a Twitter thread. It should be an editorial on how the support for speech and free expression and free inquiry is not primarily a legal thing. Obviously, there are legal issues, and it can become a legal issue, but it's primarily cultural. That is, it doesn't matter. His argument is it hardly matters what the legal protections are if the culture doesn't support them. And it hardly matters if there aren't legal protections if the culture does support it. So there's this idea of sort of like there's certain fundamental human rights. That there's due process. That process actually matters, and this comes up in lots of ways. It includes, denounce the sort of cancel culture and the sort of denouncing people without giving them a chance to actually plead their case. It's like, you convict them on the basis of whatever, social media reports or, the fact that your friend says something horrible. So there's this emphasis on due process, and the sort of rise in sort of identity politics and safetyism and collectivism. It's like these things seem all connected to me. Maybe I'm just like, inferring connection from completely coincidental correlations, right? There's a great website. I don't remember the details, but it shows that things like, the production of cheese in Wisconsin is correlated with the national suicide rate.
Yeah, I've seen that.
Yeah, right. Yeah, it's a great website. So maybe I'm just doing that, but it doesn't seem that way. It seems to me that these things are connected, and connected in the sense that, especially among people who are actively involved in discussing these issues, they often go together. So the same person who has sort of a flagrant disregard for due process will often not really, will participate in outrage mobs and denunciation mobs, right? They're connected in some way. So, and psychologically, I don't fully understand the nature of that connection, actually, but they do seem connected.
Yeah. Okay. Speaking about this, because I was speaking to a couple of people the other day, and this was, I think it was spurred on by the whole New York Post, Hunter Biden hard drive, whatever. Okay. Now, okay, my take on this hard drive is, and maybe I'm completely out of it. I don't know. I don't think there's anything.
It doesn't look like there's anything there.
I think the worst thing you're going to find is, yes, Biden lied a little bit about knowing anything about. Okay, but again, it's a politician that lied. It's a day that ends in Y. Who cares? But instead of, okay, if that story had come out and you exposed it for what it was, it would have gone away in a day or two. It's like, what, 9-10 days later, I brought it up, but people are still talking about it. The cover up, like, the censoring of it, I'm calling it censoring. The censoring by Facebook and Twitter caused all these conspiracy things to come out.
Right.
Now I mean, I put this hypothetical to them. Like I did this, I said I spoke to them a couple of days ago. Now you take that story and you change a couple of facts. Instead of Joe Biden, it's Trump. Instead of Hunter Biden, it's Eric Trump. Okay, everything else is the same. And instead of Giuliani finding it, it's AOC, and the New York Times reports it. Would that story have been banned?
Right. No, I mean it's an excellent question. I think the answer is almost definitely not. And not because the story would have had any more actual credibility, but because of the biases in the media. I mean, right? So they would want. I mean, so when.
Sorry, I'm just going to interrupt for a second. The reason I bring this up is going back to the conspiracy theories and things again. Now, if they had let that go, nothing. Like it would have been proved for what it was false. But because they censored it, all these conspiracy theories are coming up. And now, if they had censored the story about Trump, like there would be just as many conspiracy theories. Like that's what I'm like trying to like. The censorship is causing the conspiracy theories. I'm not saying let conspiracy theories go. I'm saying if you stop censoring, you'll have less conspiracy theories.
Right. So there are two ideas now in tension. Now this is stuff I read about. I'm not involved in the scholarship on, but I mean, look, Facebook, Twitter, Reddit, these are like proprietary platforms, right? They're not, people treat them like public forums, and there's a way in which they are, but they're at the base, they're run by private companies that can literally do anything they want.
Oh, yeah.
Within the law, they can do anything they want. And they can often have the laws changed so that they can do things that are illegal also because they're so rich and powerful. But there's a tension between a growing recognition that and I'm going to restrict my discussion to the United States because it's what I know. I don't really know what's going on. Actually, I have a student who's in Nigeria. So actually I have some information I've got to say Nigeria. So there's a few places I do know something about. But, I don't know anything about Mali or Switzerland, Like, I don't know so I'm going to restrict my things to the United States. There's a sort of robust and I think a healthy discussion in sort of intellectual political type circles. There's been this rise of intentional disinformation. And, the recognition has probably come from Russian and Chinese disinformation attempts. But you can get disinformation, internally. There's plenty of that also. So during the last election cycle, my favorite example were people who really believed that Dearborn, Michigan was under Sharia rule. And Michigan went Trump. Right? So you only need to convince a lot of people that this, oh my God, the radical Islam really is on our shores and they're taking over. So this is a problem. This kind of information is, and not just Dearborn. I mean, you have the whole QAnon, pedophilia. There's a world international conspiracy of pedophilia. It's like this is just completely nut crazy stuff, right? So you have that, and so there's a desire to do something to limit the damage that comes from that, whether it's internal or Russian or Chinese. And then there's also a recognition of exactly what you're saying, that if you shut it down completely, if Facebook shuts down the pages, if Twitter closes the accounts, if the newspapers refuse to cover it, then people who believe this stuff will go elsewhere. And, that's the rise of 4chan as a sort of white supremacist hate site emerged in that way, actually. So people will find somewhere to do their stuff. So I don't have an answer to that. Like, disinformation is really bad. Is effectively suppressing or censoring it? Is that the answer? Even on a private platform? I don't know. Maybe it is. It doesn't seem like a good answer, but just letting it run rampant doesn't seem like the answer either.
Yeah, but
simply refuting it doesn't seem to work. So now what are we left with?
Okay, but here's the thing: like letting it run rampant right now, I don't think it's either censor or we allow it. Again, I think this goes back to education. Okay, I've spoken to a couple of teachers. I've only got a couple of data points here, but when you look at it, most public schools are teaching the kids to take the standardized tests. They're not teaching the subject. They're teaching them to get the right answer in the standardized test. So if you don't give them those tools where, let a kid write a paragraph on a story he was read in English class, and he might make some mistakes of interpretation. But if he shows his thought process, and if you can show him where your thought process went wrong, that's a much better tool than teaching that kid to take a standardized test in English and pass it. Or, any class, and get to the point where he's in university now and he doesn't have the tools to read Alex Jones and realize that lizard people coming up from the center of the earth to molest children is not a valid idea. Okay, when you've gotten to a college kid who thinks that, you've lost the battle.
Right, you've lost already. Yeah.
Okay, I mean, again, I don't think it's not that free speech is the golden, the silver bullet here or anything like that, right? I think there's a lot of problems institutionally, up and down the thing. And I think, frankly, I'm thankful that people are starting to look at where is this coming from. And I think we have to go back and take a look at some of the policies that were put in, like, let's stop coddling kids. I don't like Thomas Sowell's latest book, their charter schools and their enemies. Like, there's one example he gives. There's a charter school in New York City, and in the same building as a public school. They're in the same neighborhood. They have the same population base. The charter school is one of the top in the state, and the public school is one of the bottom. It's in the same goddamn building. Like, okay, maybe take a look at what's being done right and wrong. But I mean, like, no one wants it because, like, it seems to be like, we can't criticize our side. Now, this was again something I said the other day, and it's like, I'm not going to let this go, and maybe I'm just fixated on it. But if you don't, if you keep pushing this stuff through, and you don't teach kids, you keep giving them this one-sided thing, you're going to get pushback. You're going to get people who aren't, like I said, who aren't capable to learn. And, I don't see how having a slanted education system in one direction then leads to normal, healthy kids. Like, I have a friend who's a counselor in the UK, and he's had people come up to him and say, I've got anxiety because I'm white. These are people in their 20s. There was that picture of, like, with the George Floyd protest, there was a little girl. She held up a sign that said privilege, Black Lives Matter, and look on that little girl's face. I mean, okay, I saw a video of a young black kid. I don't know how old he was. Under 10, running scared because he heard a police siren. I mean, we're doing a huge disservice. Like, okay, I'm not saying the police crime, there's a problem with police violence. But if you put out this thing where it's all racist, or if like, they're all giving you one silver bullet, solve the racism, solve. It's not. It is it's a mixture of things, and but no one's looks. It doesn't look. I mean, I know you guys are starting to, but no one seems to be looking into it. And if anyone does, it's like, nope, it's it's the right wing. They're doing it. It's
right. Well, so I'm teaching this semi-underground graduate class that which I refer to it as a semi-underground class because it was by invitation only and was not announced. And that was actually by, just kind of an interesting story in some ways. I pulled the class together over the summer, kind of in response to the protests and unrest and all that sort of stuff. And in response to my own denunciation and the attempt to cancel me and all this sort of stuff. And I was like, what the hell is this? And why, it was just a great thing. What the hell is this? So it was originally going to be just a discussion group. And then I realized, well, most of them were students, although it turned out not all, but most of them were students. It's like, why not give them credit? So let's make this into a class. So we all agreed on that. I agreed I wouldn't make the requirement too onerous. There is some writing at the end. And in August, I asked them point blank, should I announce this to the rest of the department and the university, and if so, how? And there's one exception, but there was a very quick, and she came over very quickly. They all were saying, no, don't announce it. There's a risk of the class being canceled. And they meant that in both sense. The sense of first it would be denounced, and then it would actually be canceled, like literally canceled. And they just didn't want to take the risk. So that's that's the story, the backstory of my semi-underground graduate class. It's not completely underground. I mean, it is now listed. They're getting credit for it. But okay, so that's the background. The class, I sort of facetiously refer to it as the psychology of counter-revolution. The formal title is the psychology of conflict, protest, and radicalization. And it includes, conventional social science empirical research, surveys, experiments on things like authoritarianism and the effectiveness of protest. But it also includes historical sources. So they've read the chapters from Gulag, and they've read a chapter from this great book on the Chinese Cultural Revolution, lots of other sort of just essays and stuff. So this past week, we were focusing on the effectiveness, and we're going to continue this week. Like we started readings and a discussion of the sort of history of the effectiveness versus ineffectiveness and intellectual justification for and against violent versus nonviolent protest. Right? So let me get back to your original point, which was about sort of racism and police and all this sort of stuff. This wasn't a required reading in the class, but one of the class is for 2.5 hours. So it's really fairly easy if somebody makes some point to then look for other sources relevant to that point dynamically in the middle of the class. So we were having this discussion, and so I called up data on the number of homicides in Baltimore before and after the 2015 riots. And the Baltimore riots were in response to some police killing, I forget.
Was it Freddie Gray?
Yeah, it was Freddie Gray. Yeah, I think it was Freddie Gray. I think that's right. That's right. So it was cops killed an unarmed black guy. I don't know the full backstory, but even this is the thing with the cops killing people. I mean, unless they directly immediately threatened, they shouldn't really be doing it. But unless their life is really threatened, I mean, it's just there's no excuse. Like, let the guy go. Like, don't kill somebody, even if you have lots of good reason to think they're a bad person. Okay. Anyway, so there are these riots, and there is a discontinuous spike in homicides starting the year after those riots. So the number of murders in Baltimore prior to those riots were around 200, 220 a year. Afterwards, every year it's been over 300. So what is the explanation? It's probably not simple. The most obvious that comes to mind is that the police said, okay, we just have to retreat. And now, if that's true, I don't, haven't done the deep dive to know that's true. That is plausible, which doesn't make it true. You have an extra 100 people, most of them black, every year killed because the police have felt the political need to retreat, if that's true.
Yeah, well, I mean, we're starting to see some of that now. Like, there's that thing that just came out from Minnesota, after the riots, like when they had the defunding the police, the number of crimes, everything that it just came out now.
This is so obvious. you know, you can have common sense, and every once in a while it's wrong. You actually want the data. But if you don't have police, what do you think is going to happen? What kind of idiot thinks that that's a good solution? Which is not to justify doing nothing about police malpractice. Yes, absolutely. If the police are screwing up, and they are screwing up, things should be done about it, and we need to figure that out. Yes, absolutely. But removing police? What are you, nuts? Are you completely clueless? It's like, oh my God.
Yeah, but okay. Again, I'm going to go back to this because, like I said, maybe I am fixating too much, and I'd like someone to tell me I am. But there was a study done by Zach Goldberg, and he put the article out in Tablet Magazine. And then last year, there was someone, I forget his name, who did a similar thing just on Twitter, but they used some data analytics. And Zach's article, I think, was based on his PhD thesis. Was about the use of the terms racism, racist, white supremacy in the media. And the other person also included Islamophobia. But if you see it, the one that Zach did, it's like, I think it's New York Times, LA, Washington Post, LA Times. I forget the fourth one. But it starts going up slowly around 2008. By the time Obama's 2 terms are over, it's tripled from what it was at the start. And already in 2008, it was tripled from what it was in 2000, or doubled from what it was in 2000. Now, if you're constantly getting these articles and they're only focusing on one side of the problem, you're not getting a balanced view. And again, I think, that has to have something to do with people going towards Antifa or BLM or, the other side, the right, with like Bugaloo Boys and Proud Boys and all this other shit. Like, I don't think you would have that many. And again, it's a small problem. It's not a lot of people, but if the number of groups doubled, you got a problem there. And, it's not just, it's the right wing or the, YouTube making people radicalized. It's everything. They're running out of stuff. Like this year, it was master bedroom is racist because the term master. It's like, come on.
Wow. You see, Titania McGrath has a long thread on how everything is racist. And it's not her own stuff. Each tweet is links to 4 bona fide articles, mass media or scholarly articles. Every once in a while, it's a social media post, but mostly it's like, like The Guardian and some. Golf is racist, jogging is racist. I mean, it's just, the bedrooms are racist. It's like, and the list goes on for at least 24 or 25 tweets, each one having 4 of these. So it's like, and obviously when Titania is doing it, it is a sort of mocking commentary on the doing of it. But each one that she presents is presented in all earnest, most by credible sources.
Yeah, I mean, okay, the most egregious one I still have seen to date was in the New York Times. It was on the front page of their op-ed page. It was 4 black girls beaten up by 2 South Asian boys. These were all high school students. And the headline of this piece and the whole gist of the piece was that was because the brown kids had internalized whiteness. I can't.
Oh my God, I didn't see that.
If I read that, it's like, come on. Okay, first of all, those kids did something wrong. And yes, there could be a racial component of it because I can tell you about racism in South Asians against black people. There's a lot of it. But, it doesn't help those girls. It doesn't help those boys because they're being let off because, white people did it. I mean, there's no good coming. And you're going to make white people resentful. Yeah. And if it's, like this whole idea of, the white fragility idea, like get over it. Like, come on. Like that too is.
So I think that's absolutely right. What I've seen, the last few months, I mean, it looks, God knows, given 2016, it looks like Biden's going to win the election. So this is not a comment about who's going to win the election. But I've seen, seriously thoughtful people who most or all of their lives voted for Democrats, saying that they, unhappily find themselves voting for, deciding to vote for Trump because of how bad this sort of this sort of ideological takeover and its downstream consequences, such as, you know, denunciations, cancel culture, firings, you know, ostracism. That how bad that their argument is that not only it's gotten bad, it's getting worse. And Trump, in their view, is the only one doing anything about it. And that not only won't the Democrats do anything about it, if anything, they will coddle it and bring it along. Now, that's not my view. I mean, I understand that view. I think there's a lot of truth to that view. I don't end up at the place of, well, therefore I'm going to vote for Trump. But there is a lot of that out there. So that is exactly what you're describing, is that people are looking at this, they are, you know, from my, sort of justifiably angry and resentful about it, and they will organize themselves in whatever ways they can in order to fight it, no matter how much they seem to be in retreat at the moment.
Well, okay, my take on, okay, I'm in Canada, so I can't even vote. So you people can tell me to go to hell if you want, but I would vote down ticket. Like, honestly, like, okay, no, there's no way I could bring myself to vote for Trump. Like, no, I just can't. Like, I don't. Like, I think he's incompetent at everything he does, and no, I wouldn't vote for him. But Biden being slightly less awful than that is not enough of a reason for me to vote for him. It's not, and again, I don't think Biden is woke. I don't think he has a clue what this stuff is.
Right. I think that's my take. That is my take. I don't think that's a clue.
But when I read his equality plan, when I read his economic equity plan, when I see Elizabeth Warren saying we need to embrace anti-racism more, when I see Kamala Harris saying we need to embrace more intersectionality, I don't think Biden has the wherewithal to stand up to this. Okay. You might be talking about James Lindsay because he's, I mean, most famously, I think he's most famous one right now because, you know,
No, but that's not only him. If it was only him, he'd be an outlier.
Yeah. No, I know there's others, but the reason I bring him up is because he made this point, and I think it actually made me laugh because if you saw the whole Evergreen thing, and there was the president of the school, Bridges, he's like, Joe Biden is George Bridges. And it's true, he is. Joe Biden would stand up there and put his hands down when they told him to put his hands down. Okay, he'd wait to ask for permission to go pee. Okay, I know he's not going to stand up to it. But again, the reason I say vote down ticket is because schools are a local issue. Police is a local issue. Yes, the Department of Education can say we're going to stop funding for this stuff or we're going to fund it more. But if the local parents get involved, if you get involved in all your local stuff, you can put a stop to a lot of the stuff that affects your day-to-day lives. And if you can put a stop to that, you can then focus on other more big, important things. That's why I don't think either of those, like if I was in the States and I was a citizen, either of those two candidates or those two parties, I feel are deserving of my vote. And that's my take on that. I understand and genuinely understand and respect that. I have done that in the past. I actually did that in 2016 because New Jersey was a lock for Hillary. So I figured, if the really only two choices were Hillary and Trump, I would have voted for Hillary. But I didn't have to worry about that. In a way more extreme than the other president, she had very large downsides. But obviously, so did Trump. And I was hoping that the negatives on both candidates were so large that a viable third party might emerge. Not that they would win the election, but that rather than getting like 2% of the vote, they get 10% of the vote or something, or 8% of the vote or something. And then that would be the building block for the emergence of an alternative to the Democrats and Republicans. So I voted Libertarian because that was I don't have a libertarian element in how I think about things, but it was not any commitment on my part to the Libertarians. They were just the closest, they were the highest vote getting third party over the last several elections. Just good, okay, like maybe they'll get 7 or 8 or even 10% or even 12%, if there was enough
it disaffected people. So that totally didn't happen. That completely didn't happen. They got like 2% or something like that. Maybe they got slightly more than they always get, but it was like hardly noticeable. Like, it was just completely fell flat. So, I kind of have given, the last time the United States had a viable third party was in the 1850s when the Republican Party emerged. I mean, prior to that, it was the Whigs and the Democrats. And a whole bunch of forces came together. There were Democrats who were disaffected with slavery. There were pro-slavery Whigs, and so there was this entire reorganization, primarily inspired by, support versus opposition to slavery at that time. And it's more obvious because everything's always more complicated than everything else, but than it sounds. But that was a lot of the upshot of how the Republican Party emerged. But it emerged by first winning lower, local elections. State assemblymen and Congress and Senate and all that kind of stuff. And so it actually emerged from the ground up rather than, full blown in a presidential election. And I think that if that's ever going to happen, which I would root for strongly, I would really love for there to be a third alternative to the Democrats and Republicans. I think that competition would be really healthy. But I don't think that's going to happen absent a successful grassroots type thing. And I just don't see that on the horizon at all. So I've surrendered, at least for now, voting for third parties.
Yeah. No, okay. Like, again, like I, a couple of people put it out, like, I just tell them, like, vote your conscience. Like,
yeah.
If someone votes for Biden or someone votes for Trump, that's not going to be the deciding factor in me, or they're a horrible person or not. Like, I'm just telling you where my head's at this point. Like, I can't support either one of those idiots. No way at all. No, but okay, you're saying, okay, let's say a third party gets 12% or whatever. Like, okay, I think I would do two things. Or if you had, 10 to 15% of the people just write in something like they're both morons. Okay. And it comes down to a close vote. Okay, I'm with you. I think Biden will win, but let's say it comes down to a close popular vote or whatever. Both the parties are going to look at that and say, you know what? If we got that 10%, there wouldn't be any dispute. There wouldn't, we might have won both the houses and the presidency or whatever, right? You have, so it might be a wake up call for at least the losing party to get better candidates or do something different.
I completely agree with that, but it just hasn't happened. And it was like, if it in my recent lifetime, if it was going to happen, I think it would have happened in 2016 because of how much disdain there was for both candidates. But even that didn't produce it. So it's like, this is beyond my expertise, that there's political science sort of process work that argues, pretty persuasively that when you have that winner-take-all type elections, which is what we have, via the Electoral College, or that those create incentives, sort of unovercomable incentives that inexorably push towards a two-party system.
Yeah. No, I mean, like again, like my nightmare scenario in your election, and okay, I'm Canadian, but it affects like your policies affect me more than just about any other. Outside the United States, Canada gets affected more by American policy than anyone else.
Yeah.
If either party wins, right? Like I said, I think Biden's going to win. So let's say Biden wins, the Democrats get 2/3 majority in both houses, and I don't even know if there's a possibility, but let's say it is, and they get 75% of the state gubernatorial legislatures.
That's never going to happen.
I'm not saying it's going to happen, but like there is your nightmare scenario. If one of these parties gets that right now, they can change the Constitution as they want. That's what you need to make a constitutional amendment or to change an amendment. You need those 2/3 majorities in both the houses. You need 75% of the legislatures to approve all that. I mean, okay, there's a couple of legal hurdles to go through beforehand, but if you have that possibility is there. And right now, I don't think anyone wants either of these two parties in the state they're in fiddling with the Constitution. Like, I think there's a lot of stuff at stake. Like, unfortunately, okay, I have libertarian leanings. I want small government, but I think it's gotten to the point where if you want government out of your life, you're going to have your life is going to have to be interested in the government to a larger extent than it was. You have to pay more attention if you don't want that government, which sucks.
Yeah. 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 Well, so this was, the historical, this aspect of this that I find interesting is that kind of thinking, as far as I can tell, was a lot of what pushed both the exploration of the New World, by the Europeans, and by the push western from the early Americans. It was, all of the way they sort of raped, pillaged, and plundered. But the main, and that's all true, but the impetus wasn't like, well, let's go out and, exploit and enslave some Indians. That was not really like the purpose. The purpose was to get away from civilization, not be told what to do, and, so there's no safety valve. There's no place for people who want to sort of shape government, what they experience, what they see as government intrusion or even oppression. There's no way for them to get away from it because there's no place to go anymore.
I don't want
that safety valve is gone.
Yeah, but okay, I don't want to keep you too much longer. But I got to ask, like the disinformation stuff, right? People are saying, "Oh, disinformation." Now, I don't want to get into argument with mass. I've got one kidney. I've got a low immune system. When I go out, I wear a mask. I do what I got to do. If I see someone not wearing a mask, I'm not going to walk up close up to them and yell at them because no, I want to keep my distance from them, right? Like I think that's the best thing. But hey, when you had all these things like put on your mask, you had the protests in Michigan just before the George Floyd incident, the anti-mask and the anti-lockdown protests. And then George Floyd happened, and all of a sudden you get these protests, and then you have the New England Journal of Medicine saying racism is a worse virus than COVID. I'm sorry, but if you're going to talk about disinformation, let's talk about that. No, okay, who am I supposed to trust now? Who the hell am I supposed to trust?
Yeah, no, I'm not. I think that's right. I mean, I think that's ridiculous. Everything about that is ridiculous. It's like, you have this performative anti-racism stuff. That's especially. After Floyd's killing, people were, mostly justifiably outraged and upset, and they wanted to do something. But it created this wave of, in response to that, Frank Dick Cotter has this great book on the Cultural Revolution in China. And that was one of my responses, was to read that. Now, we didn't have anything like the Chinese Cultural Revolution. People weren't being tortured or killed, and the mass murder didn't happen. But there was this wave of cultural conformity and punishment, usually in the form of firing or loss of position. There was just a wave of this stuff after Floyd's killing. So, in response, and then you have a genuine concern about whether it's police abuse in particular or racism in general. I think people are justifiably concerned about those things. And then that manifested in all this. So the incentives were all lined up to make the most extreme anti-racism statements. Like anti-racism, racism is a worse virus than COVID, which is just ridiculous. It's just completely ridiculous. So, this goes back to the current political stuff. I mean, so many people have died from COVID here. It's like it's just dysfunctional, and this, we can't. There's a recent report just came out from the CDC. And this is Trump's CDC, that there have been 300,000 excess deaths. So they have these models where they estimate excess deaths. They do it in a number of ways in case the model, this model might be sporadic, so they do it that way also. So it's actually more than the total number of COVID deaths. But even the number of COVID deaths is 220, 230,000, something. This is so many people. my choice for sort of, highly industrialized technological countries, it could have been a quarter of that. But a functioning government could have seen measures that could have cut that by 3/4. So I believe, I may be wrong about that, but I do believe that. So we're talking 150, 170, maybe even 200,000 people who would not die this way. This critical race theory, it's like that's just, you can't, you want to advocate it. I will put off my fight against critical race theory and the sort of descendants of Marxism for another day if what I can get from that is preventing 150,000 deaths. It starts me.
Okay. First of all, like, if you want to talk about, like, Trump did everything wrong. Okay, I shouldn't say everything here, but the first thing he did wrong was, I think it was in 2018 when he got rid of that. Whatever. I don't know what it was, but it was like a council that, like organization or something. They were a committee that took care of pandemics and they planned for stuff like that. Getting rid of that was stupid. Okay, but now in late January, early February, when he wanted to close down borders with China. Okay, again, your politics has gotten so bad that if Trump says the sun is going to set in the west, Pelosi won't believe it. Okay, so Trump wants to close down borders with China. What do de Blasio, Pelosi, I can't remember who else, I think it was the health commissioner from New York, comes out, go to Chinatown for Chinese New Year. There's no risk. Okay.
Yes, that's true.
I realized back then you didn't have all the information you do now, but I'm damn certain that Pelosi had a lot of the security information and security briefings that Trump had. So for her to go out and say that was just as bad as Trump playing it down.
Yeah.
Like, let's lay the blame where it deserves to be laid. The huge chunk of it, the majority of it, I say goes on Trump. But Pelosi has to bear some of that. De Blasio has to bear some of what happened in New York City. The other day, Chris Cuomo was on CNN. He goes, if a vaccine comes out and it's approved by the CDC and the FDA, I don't know if I want to take it. Now, who's causing conspiracy theories here? Who's causing distrust here? Like, I don't trust Trump, but at the same point, to say that from like a CNN news anchor,
right?
Like,
for me, I watched part of all three debates. I didn't watch all of any of them, but there was a point in the vice presidential debate where that was the question. What will you do if some version of what will you do if a vaccine comes out, or maybe it was just asked of Harris. And she gave an answer which that spoke to me, actually. And that is, if Trump says it's viable, I won't believe it. If Fauci says it's viable, I'll believe it.
Okay. But then, I mean, if the CDC and the FDA, and the AMA approve the vaccine, but Fauci doesn't come out and say it, I mean, are you not going to trust the AMA? Are you not going to trust this?
Yeah, well, if you have conflicting people that I would give high medical credibility to, well, then, I would hold off until they reach the consensus. Actually, I mean, if Fauci is saying something very different than like an official pronouncement by the AMA, absolutely. I'm like, well, what the hell is going on here? Yeah.
Okay, no, but I'm just saying, let's say Fauci doesn't say anything, but the AMA says, okay, it's a good vaccine.
The leadership would actually set, there are scenarios where Fauci doesn't say anything, but in a functioning government, the head of the CDC would be the foremost spokesman for credible scientific medical information. And actually, on that front, I think Fauci's done a pretty good job. And, Fauci, I don't know whether Fauci was actually a Trump appointment or not. If he was, then Trump deserves credit for that. And Trump has mostly worked pretty well with Fauci. So, as much as I, think Trump has mishandled things, I think Fauci has been a strong point, actually. Even if he's not a Trump appointment, Trump has worked pretty well with Fauci, actually. So Trump actually deserves some credit for handling that reasonably well also, even though overall I think it's really understanding it. But my main point there is that, Fauci's done a good job, but that the role of a functioning federal central government leadership is to set the tone and agenda for everybody else in major emergencies like COVID.
Oh yeah, no, okay. Look, I agree with you there.
Trump, I think,
Yeah.
Trump is being terrible. Yeah, yeah.
Oh, yeah. Trump is being terrible, but okay, this might be a reason to vote against him. But the Democrats have, like I said, if Trump says the sun's going to set in the west, the Democrats are going to check, and like that's a problem. That's a huge problem. And I'm not saying that Trump hasn't deserved some of that. Like the guy lies like it's going out of style, and it's
yeah.
And again, like that's I'm not a supporter. I'm not going to vote for the idiot. I wouldn't vote for the idiot, but it's it's like, okay, at one point or other, off topic, has nothing to do with any of this stuff, but everything that's going on in the Middle East with Israel right now. Okay, you have to give them credit. Okay, I mean, I saw Chris Hayes. I saw Chris Hayes yesterday saying, "Oh well, these are just cynical transactional deals that were done by."
I saw that. Yeah.
Like, come on, man, Saudi Arabia.
I know, right? Yeah. Let's say he's all big. Let's say he's right. A cynical transactional deal is so much better than no deal at all. It's like, let's say he's completely right. Okay, that's fine. I'll take a cynical. I mean, treaties between countries are always cynical transactional deals.
Yeah, but okay. I mean, again, like, it sounds like I'm trying to defend, but it's the misinformation thing that really bugs me. Like when Soleimani got killed, right? When Soleimani got killed.
Yeah.
Everyone's like, oh my God, Trump's responsible for that plane being shot down. He's responsible for all the protesters that are getting killed. It's all Trump's fault. My counter to that was, okay, those protests actually right now in Iran, they brought a lot of attention to it. They're getting a groundswell. More and more people are going up against that regime. What if those protests bring down that regime? Is Trump responsible for that? If he was solely responsible for everything that happened after Soleimani, and those protests are a thing of it, are you going to give him that credit?
But well, I really don't like Trump, but I think I can separate out my overall evaluation from, like everything he does is terrible. And I think I don't know how major his role has been in this state of treaties and agreements between Israel and various neighborhoods, but at minimum, he hasn't screwed it up. And it does look like, the State Department has facilitated some of that. So he absolutely deserves credit for that. This reminds me, in some extent, this reminds me of the impeachment stuff. So, I think Trump lies to his teeth all the time, but that's not an impeachable offense. I think he's really corrupt, although you can be corrupt legally, and I think he has skirted the law around that. But, even if he broke some of those laws, that's not completely clear to me. The standard for impeachment was high crimes and misdemeanors. These are like low crimes, and it's not even misdemeanor in the legal sense. So there was Trump could well have been guilty of everything he was accused of, and none of it constituted impeachable offenses, as far as I can tell. And you don't want to be in the business of impeaching a president unless they really, really engage in some sort of high crime or treason or something like that. So he didn't even come close. This is not like a defense of Trump. He lies, he exaggerates, he misleads, he's crude, in my opinion, he's corrupt and self-serving. And he's a lot of very bad things. But then, you can't impeach somebody for being narcissistic. That's like not an impeachable crime.
Yeah. No, but okay, but that's just it. Like I'll give you the last word after this but the truth of him is bad enough that you don't need to embellish it. When you start doing that, people lose trust in you. Like my whole thing with all of this is we have lost trust in our institutions, and that's a horrible, horrible thing. And they're going to need to gain that back. And that's going to require a lot of more openness, a lot more transparency, and a lot less censorship. Even if it's not, it's a private business, they can do what they want. Okay, like this Brett Weinstein thing with Facebook. They suspended his account. They told him a review is being done. This is permanent. No further reviews. He raised a stink, rightfully so, because I don't see Brett Weinstein getting canceled, doing anything to be suspended for. And they're like, oh, well, we that was an automatic thing and we made a review. It's like, but your message said you'd already done the review. Like, so average Joe who sees that say, okay, I don't have those connections. I lose my account. My account's gone. That's going to spur up some more conspiracy theories. Like I saw one the other day. It was a blue check journalist. I think it was yesterday. It was right after the Weinstein thing. He's like, oh, I just posted a story about the Biden hard drive and my Wi-Fi cut out. Is that a coincidence? It's like, come on, man. Like seriously, but you're going to fuel this stuff. You are going to fuel all this stuff. Yeah. So sorry, like I said, I'll give you the last word. If you want to say anything about, conspiracy theories, extremism, or whatever you want, let people know where they can get a hold of you and cut it short.
Yeah. I don't know, a few months ago, I'm not even sure if it's still up there because I did delete my tweets for a while, but I did a thread on how I had a slew of interactions with Psychology Today, which were not actually political bias or censorship. And they kind of looked that way. And superficially, I could see how they would appear that way. And actually, when I eventually published something somewhere else, I played into that by billing it as banned by Site Today. But I was doing that facetiously, not, but maybe some people don't get the facetiousness. So in every case, I either violated their rules or it really wasn't psychology. So, and they were right about every, it either did violate their rules, which are announced so I really can't stand the infliction of sanctions for plausible sounding arguments on grounds that were never articulated before you decided to sanction somebody. Right? That sounds like post hoc. You don't like them. You don't like their ideas. You don't like the points. You don't like their tone, and you're coming up with bases of bullshit in order to get them off your platform. But that's not what happened. To me, what happened to me in every case, they clearly articulated their standards. I did not follow those. So, that was my thread. So it's not everything that looks like bias, censorship, or suppression actually is.
Yeah, no. Okay, I'm not saying everything is, but okay. The Biden story, to me, that's censorship. Like that's outright censorship. And what Luke Yonoff, when you're talking about, he did a talk at UNC the other day. It was a debate. Well, it was a talk with two other people about free speech, and that was his point. And it's the First Amendment is the best set of laws or best guidelines for laws for free speech that's out there. But the First Amendment is not the end all and be all of the principle of free speech, because the principle of free speech, Milton and Mill, I think, wrote the two best books on it, and they argue a lot about social pressure, as well as the government pressure. And we need to get rid of that social pressure. But anyways, on that note, I'm going to end this because I don't want to keep you too long. I know you got your grandkids. So thanks a lot for talking to me. And I'll confuse people even more and put this out. Anyways, it was good talking to you.
So, Greg, this was good as always.
Right. I'll see you later. And thanks everyone for listening. Bye.